The old man in tattered clothes stood at the entrance of the grand estate, his hands trembling as security guards dragged him toward the gate. Behind him, a woman's voice, cold as the harmattan wind, cut through the air. "Throw this beggar out. How dare he claim to own this house?" The woman was his wife. The guards were men he had hired. And the mansion they were throwing him out of? He had built it with his own money. But here's what shocked him most. Watching from the window, doing nothing, were his 3 children. The same children he had worked 20 years to provide for. The same children whose school fees he had paid in full, whose weddings he had funded, whose businesses he had established. They watched him being dragged through the dust like a street dog. And they did nothing. How did a billionaire end up being thrown out of his own home by his own family? How did the man who owned 7 businesses across 3 countries become unrecognizable to his own wife? If powerful stories like this move you, please hit subscribe. And tell us where you're watching from. I love seeing our global family in the comments. Alright, back to how this nightmare began. 20 years earlier, James Okonkwo was not born wealthy. He was born in a Mato village in southeastern Nigeria, where the red earth grew more cassava than it grew dreams. His father was a palm wine tapper, his mother a petty trader who sold vegetables in the market. But James had something special, a mind for business and a hunger for success that burned hotter than the midday sun. "That boy will either become very rich or die trying," his grandmother used to say, watching young James count and recount the few naira notes he earned from selling firewood. At 25, James married Mary, the most beautiful girl in 3 villages. She was 18, with skin like polished mahogany and a smile that made men forget their own names. Her father was the village chief, and she was used to being treated like royalty. "I will make you the wealthiest woman in this region," James promised on their wedding night, holding her hands in their small mud house with a leaking roof. "Our children will never know poverty." Mary smiled, but behind her eyes was doubt. How could this man with empty pockets and big dreams ever make her wealthy? Within 2 years, they had their first child, a son named Daniel. Then came their daughter Elizabeth, and finally their youngest son Michael. 3 beautiful children in a house that was falling apart. James worked like a man possessed. He started with a small provision shop, then moved to buying and selling textiles. He traveled to Lagos, to Onitsha, to ABA, sometimes sleeping in motor parks because he couldn't afford hotels. He missed birthdays, anniversaries, and traditional ceremonies. "Your husband loves money more than he loves you," Mary's mother told her daughter during one of those long absences. But James wasn't just chasing money. He was chasing dignity. He was running from the poverty that had defined his childhood, the hunger that had been his constant companion, the shame of wearing torn clothes to school. And slowly, painfully, his efforts began to bear fruit. By the time he was 35, James owned 3 successful businesses. By 40, he had investments in real estate, transportation, and import-export. By 45, he was a billionaire, one of the wealthiest men in the entire Southeast. He built a mansion in Port Harcourt that made people stop and stare. 10 bedrooms, a swimming pool, marble floors imported from Italy, chandeliers from France. He bought his wife 3 cars, filled her wardrobe with the finest clothes, and adorned her with gold jewelry that would make a queen jealous. His children attended the best schools in Nigeria, then universities abroad. Daniel studied business in England, Elizabeth studied law in Canada, and Michael studied engineering in South Africa. James had kept his promise. He had made his family wealthy beyond imagination. But something had changed. The first sign came during a family dinner 2 years before our story began. James, now 55, was discussing plans to expand one of his businesses. Daniel, His eldest son, now 30 and married with 2 children, barely looked up from his phone. "Dad, why do you still work so hard?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying a hint of irritation. "You have enough money already. Just rest and enjoy." "A man who stops working starts dying," James replied, repeating one of his grandmother's proverbs. "That's old village thinking," Elizabeth interjected, examining her freshly manicured nails. "You're 55, Daddy. You should be playing golf and traveling the world, not stressing yourself in boardrooms." James looked at his daughter, this sophisticated lawyer who spoke with a Canadian accent and seemed uncomfortable in her own country. When had she become this person? "What do any of you know about stress?" he asked quietly. "You've never known hunger. You've never had to walk 5 miles to school with no shoes. You've never had to." "Here we go again." Michael, the youngest, groaned dramatically. "The 'when I was your age' speech. Dad, we've heard it 1,000 times." The table fell silent. Mary, his wife, said nothing. She simply continued eating her imported steak, her gold bracelets clinking against her plate. That night, alone in his study, James made a decision that would change everything. "I need to know," he whispered to himself, staring at the family portrait on his wall, a portrait where everyone was smiling but no one looked truly happy. "I need to know if they love me, or just my money." The idea came to him like a revelation. He would test them. He would hide his wealth, disguise himself as poor, and return home. He would see how they treated him when they thought he had nothing. It was radical, perhaps even foolish, but James had always been a man who needed to know the truth, no matter how painful. He spent the next 3 months planning. He secretly transferred all his assets to offshore accounts under different names. He arranged for his businesses to appear to collapse, spreading rumors of bad investments and debts. He told his family he was going to Ghana for business. Instead, he went to a small village in Cross River State, where nobody knew him. For 3 months, James lived as a poor man. He rented a small room with no electricity, fetched water from the community well, and ate once a day. He let his beard grow wild, allowed his clothes to become worn and dirty, and learned to walk with the defeated shuffle of a man who had lost everything. He lost weight. His skin darkened from working under the sun. He took a job as a laborer at a construction site to complete his transformation. His soft businessman's hands became calloused. His back began to ache from sleeping on a thin mat on the floor. But something unexpected happened during those 3 months. He found peace. In that small village, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a few naira in his pocket, James remembered who he used to be. He remembered the young man with big dreams, the man who worked hard not for luxury, but for dignity. He made friends with his neighbors, a fisherman named Bassie, who shared his meager catch, a widow named Mama Blessing who treated his malaria with herbs when he couldn't afford a hospital, a young boy named Emmanuel who reminded him of his younger self. "Olga," Bassie said one evening as they sat by the river, "you carry sadness in your eyes. What troubles you?" "I'm thinking about my family," James admitted. "I haven't seen them in months." "Family is everything," Bassie said, mending his fishing net with practiced hands. "But sometimes the people in our house are not truly family. True family is found in the heart, not in the blood." Those words haunted James. Could it be true? Had he spent 20 years building wealth for people who only loved what he could give them, not who he was? There was only one way to find out. On a hot Tuesday afternoon, a bent old man in dirty clothes approached the massive gates of the Okonkwo mansion in Port Harcourt. James, though he looked nothing like the wealthy businessman who had left 3 months ago, stood before his own home like a stranger. The guards at the gate were new, He had instructed his head of security to hire fresh staff while he was away, part of his plan. "Please," he said, his voice raspy from deliberately not speaking properly. "I need to see Madame Mary. I am her husband." The guards looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Oga, you done mad?" one of them said. "Madame's husband is a big man, a billionaire. You think this man wear raga cloth fit be Madame husband?" "Please," James begged, his heart pounding. "Just tell her that James is here. She will know me." Reluctantly, one guard went inside. 5 minutes later, he returned with Mary. James's breath caught in his throat. His wife looked more beautiful than ever, her skin glowing, her body draped in expensive lace, gold jewelry dripping from her neck and wrists. But her eyes were cold. "Madam, this madman claims say him be your husband," the guard said. Mary looked at the dirty old man before her. For a moment, just a brief moment, James saw recognition flash in her eyes. She knew. Despite the beard, despite the dirt, despite the weight loss, she knew it was him. And then she made her choice. "I have never seen this man before in my life," she said, her voice steady and cold. "He is a madman trying to scam us. Throw him out." "But, Mary," James said, his voice breaking, using her name the way only he did. "It's me, your husband. We married in a Maudo village. I promised I would make you the wealthiest woman." "Security," Mary shouted. "Get this lunatic away from my house." The guards grabbed James roughly. He didn't resist. He needed to see how far this would go. "Please, just let me speak to my children," he begged. "Daniel, Elizabeth, Michael." Through the window, he saw them. His 3 children, standing in the living room, watching this scene unfold. Daniel with his arms crossed, Elizabeth with a look of disgust, Michael recording the incident on his phone, probably to share the story of the crazy beggar who claimed to be their father. None of them moved to help him. None of them recognized him, or pretended not to. "Take him away," Daniel's voice came from inside. "Make sure he doesn't come back." As the guards dragged him toward the gate, James felt something inside him break. Not his body. His body had endured worse during his months in the village. But his heart, his spirit, his belief in family, that shattered like glass hitting concrete. This was the moment from our opening scene. The moment that would define everything that followed. But the test wasn't over yet. The guards threw James onto the street outside his own compound. Cars honked as they swerved around him. Pedestrians glanced at him with pity and disgust. Just another homeless madman in a city full of them. As James sat in the dust, catching his breath, an old Toyota Corolla pulled up beside him. The door opened, and a young woman stepped out. It was Grace, his former housegirl. The young woman who had worked in his house 5 years ago, whom he had sponsored through nursing school when she couldn't afford the fees. The girl whose mother's hospital bills he had paid without being asked, whose younger brother he had given a job in one of his businesses. "Papa James," Grace said, her eyes wide with shock. Is that you?" James looked up at her, tears streaming down his dusty face. Finally, someone who recognized him. Someone who cared. Grace fell to her knees beside him. "What happened to you? We heard that the business collapsed, that you had lost everything, but to see you like this." She was crying now. Come to my house. Let me take care of you." "Grace, James's voice failed him. "No, don't talk now. Just come." Grace lived in a small 2-bedroom flat in a modest neighborhood, a home she could afford because of the education James had given her, the job she had secured with her nursing degree. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and filled with love. She bathed his wounds from where the guards had roughed him up, gave him clean clothes, her late father's clothes, she said, and made him a simple meal of jollof rice and fried plantain. When I had nothing, you gave me everything, Grace said softly as James ate. My mother would still be suffering if not for you. My brother would be selling pure water on the streets. You changed our lives, Papa. Now, let me help you. James wept openly. This girl, who had been his servant, showed him more love than his own wife and children. Over the next week, Grace took care of James. She invited him to stay in her spare room, shared her food with him, and even took him to her church where the congregation welcomed him without knowing who he was. But Grace had a plan. Papa, what happened at the house was not right, she said one evening. I don't know what kind of test you're running. Yes, I know you're testing them. You're too smart to have truly lost everything. But whatever you're planning, you need witnesses. You need to show them the truth. She was right, James realized. It was time for phase 2 of his plan. Through Grace's brother, who still worked in one of James's businesses, they arranged for a wealthy investor from Ghana to visit the Okonkwo household. The investor, supposedly looking to buy some of James's remaining assets, wanted to meet with the family. This investor was actually James's old friend and business partner, Peter, who wasn't on the plan. Peter arrived at the mansion in a convoy of luxury cars, dressed in the finest Igbata, playing the role of a multimillionaire to perfection. Mary received him with the warmest smile, her voice dripping with honey. Welcome, welcome, my dear friend, she said, bowing slightly, something James had never seen her do in all their years of marriage. Please come in. We are so honored by your visit. The children were equally obsequious. Daniel immediately began discussing business opportunities. Elizabeth flirted shamelessly despite being married, and Michael took photos to post on social media, networking with international investors. Peter played his part perfectly. He spoke of business deals, of potential partnerships, of money that could be made. The family hung on his every word, their eyes gleaming with greed. Then Peter casually mentioned, I heard your husband, James, had some business troubles. Such a shame. He was a good man, very generous. I remember one time, he paid for a house girl's education when he didn't have to. And another time, he paid hospital bills for someone's mother he barely knew. Very unusual behavior for a businessman, spending money on servants. But that was James. Always had a soft heart for people beneath his station. Oh, my husband was too soft, Mary said, waving her hand dismissively. Always giving money to people who didn't deserve it. That's partly why we're in this situation now. He gave too much to his family too, Daniel added. Set us all up with businesses, paid for everything, but he never thought about securing his own future. Honestly, Elizabeth chimed in, Daddy was brilliant at making money, but terrible at keeping it. If he had just listened to us, invested properly, not wasted resources on random people. Peter listened, his face neutral, but his heart burning with anger on his friend's behalf. Speaking of your husband, Peter said, I heard he came to visit you last week. Someone told me there was an incident at your gate. Mary's face darkened. That was not my husband. That was some madman pretending to be him. Can you imagine? A dirty beggar claiming to be James Okonkwo? We had him thrown out, of course. You didn't even consider that it might have been him? Peter pressed. My husband would never let himself look like that, Mary said firmly. He has too much pride. That man was probably some villager who knew James's story and thought he could scam us. There are many wicked people in this world, Chief. That night, everything came together. James, still disguised but now wearing slightly better clothes, provided by Grace, returned to his mansion. This time, Peter was with him, along with a lawyer, a camera crew that Peter claimed was for a business documentary, and Grace. The family welcomed Peter warmly, not recognizing James standing behind him in the entourage. "Thank you for coming back, Chief," Mary said. "We are ready to discuss business seriously." "Actually," Peter said, his voice suddenly cold, "I'm not here for business. I'm here to expose the truth." He gestured to James. "This man, whom you threw out of his own house last week, is James Okonkwo. Your husband, your father, the man who built everything you have." The room went silent. James stepped forward and slowly removed his fake beard, revealing his face, thinner now, hardened by suffering, but unmistakably him. "James?" Mary's voice was barely a whisper. Her face went pale. The children stood frozen in shock. You were testing us?" Daniel finally said, his voice trembling. "Yes," James said quietly. His voice was steady, but his heart was breaking. "I spent 20 years building wealth for this family. 20 years working day and night, sacrificing everything so that none of you would ever know hunger or poverty. And I needed to know if you loved me or just my money." He paused, looking at each of them, his wife of 30 years, his 3 children whom he had devoted his life to providing for. "You failed the test," he said simply. "Not because you didn't recognize me physically. I understand that I looked very different. You failed because even when you suspected it might be me, even for a moment, you chose to protect your comfort over investigating the truth. You chose luxury over love." Tears were streaming down Mary's face now. "James, please." I didn't." "You knew it was me," James said, his voice breaking for the first time. "I saw it in your eyes, Mary. For just a second you knew. And you chose to pretend you didn't. You chose this mansion, these cars, this lifestyle, over your own husband." Mary collapsed into a chair, sobbing. The children stood like statues, unable to speak. "But that's not even the worst part," James continued. He turned to look at his children. "Daniel, Elizabeth, Michael, I gave you everything. The best education money could buy. Businesses, cars, houses. I asked for nothing in return except that you become good people. People with character. People with compassion." He shook his head slowly. "But I created monsters instead. I gave you so much that you forgot the value of anything. You forgot that people matter more than possessions. You forgot kindness, humility, gratitude." "Dad, we're sorry," Elizabeth whispered, tears now flowing down her face too. "We didn't know, we thought." "You thought what?" James's voice rose for the first time. "You thought it was okay to watch an old man being beaten and thrown out into the street? Even if he wasn't your father, even if he was just a confused elderly man, you stood there and watched. You recorded it on your phone for entertainment." He pointed at Michael, who was now trembling, his phone hanging limply in his hand. "What kind of people have you become?" James asked, his voice full of pain. "What kind of people have I raised?" The room was silent except for the sound of crying. Then Grace stepped forward. Small, humble Grace in her simple dress. "Mr. James," she said softly, "may I speak?" James nodded, too emotional to speak. Grace looked at the family, this wealthy, powerful family that had everything yet understood nothing. "When I worked in this house 5 years ago," Grace began, "I was nobody. A poor village girl cleaning toilets and washing clothes. Most of you barely looked at me. I was invisible. But Mr. James saw me. He asked about my dreams. He learned that I wanted to be a nurse but couldn't afford school. And he paid for everything. Not because I asked. Not because he expected anything in return. But because he believed that every person deserves a chance." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. When my mother was dying in the hospital and we had no money for treatment, I didn't even tell Mr. James. But somehow he found out. He paid the entire bill, hundreds of thousands of naira. He saved my mother's life. When I tried to thank him, you know what he said? He said, "Grace, when God blesses you, you must bless others. That is the only wealth that matters." Grace turned to face Mary and the children directly. "This man gave you everything. But the lesson he was trying to teach you, the most important lesson you never learned. He taught you how to be rich. But he couldn't teach you how to be human. That was something you had to choose for yourself." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Mary stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She walked toward James, her makeup running down her face from crying. "James," she whispered, reaching for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't take her hand either. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I was scared. When I saw that man at the gate who looked so broken, so defeated, I was scared it really was you. I was scared of what it would mean, of losing all of this. And so I lied to myself. I told myself it couldn't be you because you would never let yourself fall that low. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." "I didn't fall, Mary," James said softly. "I chose this. I chose to strip away everything to find the truth. And now I have it." "What? What are you going to do?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. James was quiet for a long moment. He looked around the mansion, the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the expensive furniture. Then he looked at his family, broken, crying, finally seeing their reflection clearly for the first time. "I'm going to tell you a story," James said finally. "In my village, there was an old proverb my grandmother used to say, 'The baobab tree does not grow because the wind praises it. It grows because its roots are deep.' I spent 20 years growing this tree, this family, this wealth, this empire. But I forgot to check if the roots were strong. I built everything on sand." He walked to the window and looked out at the compound, the swimming pool, the fountain, the manicured gardens. "I'm not going to take everything away from you," James said. "That would be cruel, and I am not a cruel man. But things are going to change." He turned back to face them. "Mary, you will remain my wife if you choose to be. But we will no longer live in this mansion. We're going to downsize, significantly. We're moving to a modest home in a middle-class neighborhood. You can keep 1 car, not 3. And you're going to learn to cook again, to clean again, to remember what it means to work with your own hands." Mary nodded, unable to speak. "Daniel, Elizabeth, Michael," James continued, addressing his children. "The businesses I gave you, you're going to keep them, but with conditions. You will each employ at least 5 young people from disadvantaged backgrounds and mentor them personally. You will give 10% of your profits to charity every year. And you will work in those businesses yourself, not just as owners, but as employees. You need to understand what it means to earn something." The children nodded, shame written across their faces. "And this mansion," James said, gesturing around him, "will become a training center. We're going to turn it into a skills acquisition center for young people from poor backgrounds, teaching them trades, business skills, computer programming. We're going to give other people the chances I wish I'd had when I was young." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I made a mistake," James admitted. "I thought wealth was the greatest gift I could give you. But I was wrong. The greatest gift is wisdom. The greatest gift is character. The greatest gift is knowing that your value doesn't come from what you own, but from who you are and how you treat others." Grace smiled through her tears. Peter, his friend, nodded with approval. The lawyer began taking notes, There would be legal documents to prepare, trusts to establish, properties to transfer. "I forgive you," James said finally, looking at each family member in turn. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. Forgiveness means we move forward together, but we move forward differently. We become better. We become the people we should have been all along. Mary rushed forward and embraced her husband, holding him tightly. This time, James held her back. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." The children joined the embrace, all of them crying. Not tears of sadness now, but tears of release, of recognition, of hope for redemption. 2 years later, the transformation was complete. James and Mary lived in a comfortable but modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Mary had indeed learned to cook again, and she discovered she actually enjoyed it. She also volunteered at the Skills Center 3 days a week, teaching young women life skills. Daniel's business had tripled in size, but he was a different kind of businessman now. His employees loved working for him because he treated them with respect and dignity. He mentored 5 young entrepreneurs personally, and 3 of them had started successful businesses of their own. Elizabeth had become one of the most sought-after lawyers in Port Harcourt, but not because she represented wealthy clients. She specialized in pro bono work for people who couldn't afford legal representation. She'd helped dozens of people who had been wrongly accused, unfairly evicted, or cheated out of their property. Michael had used his engineering degree to create low-cost housing solutions for poor communities. His company built affordable, quality homes for families who had never dreamed they could own property. And the mansion? It had become the James Okonkwo Skills Acquisition Center, one of the most successful training facilities in the region. Hundreds of young people had passed through its doors, learning trades that lifted them and their families out of poverty. Grace now served as the center's director, having proven herself as a natural leader and organizer. Her mother, fully recovered, worked in the center's medical clinic, treating students and community members. One evening, James and Mary sat on their modest porch, watching the sunset. Their grandchildren were playing in the small yard, children who were being raised very differently from how their parents had been raised. "Do you miss it?" Mary asked quietly. "The mansion? The luxury?" James thought for a moment, then smiled. "No," he said honestly. "I miss what I thought it represented. But I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or properties. True wealth is measured in lives touched, in people helped, in love given and received." "You taught us that," Mary said, squeezing his hand. "The hard way, but you taught us." "Sometimes," James said, "the only way to see clearly is to strip away everything that blocks your vision. I had to lose everything to find what truly mattered." A car pulled up, and Grace stepped out with a young woman, one of the graduates from the center who had just opened her own tailoring shop.
"Papa James."
"Mama Mary," Grace called out. "We have good news. Blessing just got her first major contract." James and Mary stood up, smiling, ready to celebrate this young woman's success. As they welcomed their guests, James thought about his journey from poverty to wealth, from wealth to disguised poverty, and finally to true richness. He had tested his family and found them wanting, but he had also given them a chance to become better, and they had taken it. That, James realized, was the real miracle. Not wealth, not success, but transformation, redemption,
growth.
"A tree is known by its fruit," his grandmother used to say. For years, James had grown a tree that produced rotten fruit. But with patience, pruning, and proper care, even a sick tree could be healed. And looking around at his family now, humbler, kinder, more purposeful, James knew that the healing had begun. True wealth is not found in money or possessions, but in character, compassion, and the positive impact we have on others' lives. A family built only on material wealth will crumble, but a family built on love, respect, and shared values will endure forever. The greatest inheritance we can leave our children is not money, but wisdom, integrity, and a heart that serves others. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Thank you for watching till the end.